The breaking news out of Washington, D.C. Once again, Jack Smith shows up in the headlines.
That's right. So this is a fascinating response from the Administrative Office of the United States Courts. This was a letter sent to Chuck Grassley, who had inquired about why Judge Boasberg, who many people know from these nationwide injunctions issues, he was kind of at the front line of the judicial lawfare against the administration right at the beginning. So not a strange name to folks that watch this program. But they were inquiring why, because he was the one that signed off on the subpoenas to get the phone records of the sitting U.S. senators and congressmen. Right. And on top of that, Jack Smith also filed a non-disclosure order request wanting to make sure that Verizon, AT&T, all these phone companies that were getting these subpoenas would not notify their customers, your data, your information, your records have been subpoenaed by the federal government, by the Justice Department. And Chuck Grassley wanted to know, why did he sign off on that? Why did the judge say, you can't tell Ted Cruz, you can't tell Marsha Blackburn, you can't tell Lindsey Graham, and all the others that were subpoenaed that their records have been taken up? And it's a very interesting response, Jordan, from the courts. This director, Robert Conrad of the Administrative Office of the Courts, is arguing that the reason that this judge signed off on the non-disclosure order, barring the U.S. senators from knowing that they had been subpoenaed, is because it's pretty much just a standard form. He didn't probably even know it was senators, because the only thing on this request, which is boilerplate information, so no arguing of why it's important they not be told, right, but the only identifier is the phone number itself. Therefore, the judge would have to see it and instantly recognize the phone number of a sitting senator in order to know that that's who this is.
So here's what, Will, just to break that down. So like what Will is saying is that they don't even attach the subpoena when they go to the judge to say we want non-disclosure orders on these, going to those telephone companies of the records that we're requesting on these, and here's a bunch of phone numbers. And then that's it. So the Department of Justice, under their policies at the time, now those policies are changing, but the policies at the time, you could just submit a bunch of phone numbers and say, please sign off on our non-disclosure order, and that's it. Now, does that mean the judges couldn't be a check? No. But the usual practice, which is a little bit scary if you think about it, has been DOJ doesn't have to attach the subpoena, just says, we want these numbers, we want this info. And by the way, you can't inform the owners of those numbers.
So DOJ requests, and they complain about separation of powers here, but yet they're just rubber stamping through the courts these requests. It raises a host of constitutional issues, Jordan, as well as the protection of everyday Americans' information. If judges are just getting the request in boilerplate language, rubber stamping it through, and they would have to know the individual's phone number at a glance, or ask more questions to even know who this order is pertaining to.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting here is that there are administrative subpoenas that the DOJ can issue on its own. Now, when you look at those, you'd say there's like drug crimes, healthcare fraud, reasons why you'd want, we were talking about before, like, and drugs is on there. First thing we talked about today was, again, not disclosing to a bunch of drug names out. You wouldn't want that public, because then they'd know, and it would mess up the entire investigation. And I'm wondering if that's how Jack Smith went at this. But his was a criminal investigation. Now, in criminal, those are administrative subpoenas, are kind of a part of investigations, but they're not supposed to be like the criminal investigation, which would go through a grand jury subpoena process, so the grand jury can subpoena the documents. It would then be issued. That doesn't require a judge approval, but it requires a grand jury to say, yes, let's get these documents. And then there's actual judicial subpoenas. So I'm wondering here is, where did he file this? I'm trying to go through the document. As a criminal investigation, was he doing it under the administrative subpoena ability of the DOJ? But this has been changed. In 2024, this was changed. So this law but he filed these before 2024. So moving forward, after 2024, prosecutors are required to notify the court if they're seeking a gag order against a member of Congress, so that judges can take that into consideration. Yep. So that has changed. But he is using the previous gray area to say, well, I don't need to ask questions. And by the way, just to make clear to everybody, they don't have to be a rubber stamp. There's no law that says you can't ask these prosecutors, what am I doing here? I don't have your subpoena. You didn't attach it. You're asking for all these different phone numbers. Yeah. I don't even know what this is about. And you're not only asking for the phone numbers, information going to Verizon, all these different companies. You're asking me to keep it under seal so that the people whose phone numbers those are never get notified.
Yeah, what I like in these moments when we're on air and these kind of breaking news moments happen is we are posing a lot of questions. We are doing that deep dive. Jordan's saying, how did this happen? And what we're able to do is actually reach out to members of our team who are working. Understand that you're seeing a very small portion of the organization right now. There's a large group of people. We said, hey, we have a question. So you'll send it to some of your legal experts. They'll start doing a deep dive. We'll get actual legitimate answers. We're not just posing questions to pose questions here. So in these moments where you hear us questioning, well, how could they do this? What would it may be? Understand there's people on the other side of this glass, if you will, who are doing that heavy lifting right now, who are finding out all that information so we can report it back to you. Same, obviously, with our media work, all the incredible crew. But when you're talking about these kind of topics as they break, it is why it's important that we have such a top team.
And what we're also seeing is, one, it's exposing a lot. And yes, there are times, Jordan, when, yes, the DOJ, if they are pursuing a case against someone, would need to keep that under wraps and not let someone know they're the target of an investigation, where that person's a flight risk, or whether it's because of an impending threat to Americans or to people that could be harmed by that, or whether or not they're afraid of tampering with witnesses or something of that effect, or destroying or obstruction of justice in some sort of way. When you're talking about members of Congress and it being rubber stamped, and also, to some degree, I feel like that should be the exception of issuing these type of non-disclosure, not just the general rule that every judge follows this rubber stamp method. If that is the case, if the Justice Department can effectively ask whatever they want of the courts, at least under a Biden administration, when it's going after conservatives here, then what is the point of the third co-equal branch of government being the judiciary if they're just effectively a rubber stamp administrative office for the Department of Justice?
Right. I mean, I'd say, again, this is why we have said that the Department of Justice, like so many government agencies, we talked about the IRS, we took on the IRS, and they've had to change their policies when it comes to their tax-exempt division, and we totally, kind of cleared house of that division, and, there haven't been the kind of issues that haven't arisen lately, if you've realized, and one-offs every once in a while, but it's not widespread, and you would know about it widespread now because people are looking for that. Like, hey, if my conservative group got this, did other groups that were like this get this? And you're not hearing about it now. That's because that whole tax-exempt division got new rules. We got the consent decree that said you can't do this, you can't politically target. The information you were seeking was wrong. When you read through this and you start realizing that it's like what we're seeing here is they're playing hot potato. Okay, so first it's Jack Smith. Then you go to Jack Smith and say, Jack Smith was looking for this information. And then you go to the judge and say, hey, Judge, why did you just sign off on all this? And then the judge's administrative division, not the judge themselves, but their administrative division writes back and says, well, because the judge doesn't even know what they're asking for. Well, then why does it even go to a judge? Right. I mean, at this point, like you start for gag orders. I mean, so they're just issuing gag orders at random based off numbers. They don't even know if the numbers are real. So think about that. There's no, and now that has been corrected for members of Congress, but we also have to think about, should this be corrected further for Americans as well? I mean, it just seems like where this needs to exist is pretty simple. Violent crimes, terrorism, money, the real just investigating whether, first of all, Jack Smith really didn't have grounds to get these numbers. These members of Congress are protected by the speech and debate clause. Yeah.